He looked at the man sitting on the park bench and saw a thug. He saw a hoodie, he saw skin color, and he saw a target. What Officer Rick Miller didn't see was the Navy Cross in the man's history, the scars from 3 tours in Afghanistan, or the fact that he was messing with one of the deadliest, most disciplined men on the planet. This cop thought he was the hunter, but he was about to find out he was the prey. This is the story of how a power-tripping officer harassed a Navy SEAL commander in public, and the brutal karma that cost him absolutely everything. The morning air in the affluent suburb of Oak Haven was crisp, smelling faintly of freshly cut grass and expensive espresso. It was a town where the lawns were manicured to the millimeter, and the neighbors watched each other through parted blinds. Isaiah Washington sat on a wrought iron bench in the center of Liberty Park, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand. At 34, Isaiah had the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable, though they rarely understood why. He didn't fidget. He didn't check his phone every 3 seconds. He just sat, watching the world with eyes that had seen too much of it burn. He was dressed comfortably for his morning off, a charcoal grey hoodie, loose-fitting joggers, and worn-out running shoes. To the untrained eye, he looked like a drifter or someone who had just rolled out of bed. To a trained eye, the way his feet were planted flat on the ground and his head constantly swiveled on a subtle axis would have signaled operator. Isaiah was a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, a SEAL with Team 6. He was currently on a mandatory 2-week leave following a high-op mission in the Horn of Africa that had gone sideways before going right. He was in Oak Haven to meet an old friend and mentor, Admiral Thomas Nathan, who had retired to this quiet enclave. They were scheduled to meet at 10 a.m. It was currently 9:45 a.m. Isaiah took a sip of his coffee, enjoying the anonymity. For the first time in months, nobody was shooting at him, and nobody needed him to make a life or death decision. But peace, for men like Isaiah, was often a mirage. Across the street, a patrol cruiser rolled to a stop at the red light. The vehicle, emblazoned with Oak Haven Police Department, gleamed in the sunlight. Behind the wheel sat Sergeant Rick Miller. Miller was a 20-year veteran of the force, but not the kind you celebrate. He was the kind of cop who peaked in high school and used the badge to chase that feeling of dominance. He had a thick neck, a buzz cut that was fighting a losing battle against a receding hairline, and a record of excessive force complaints that had been conveniently swept under the rug by the local police union. Miller scanned the park. It was his town, his territory. He liked to keep it clean. His eyes drifted over the young mothers pushing strollers, the elderly couple feeding pigeons, and then landed on Isaiah. Miller's brow furrowed. A black male, hoodie, loitering. In his park, in this neighborhood. The light turned green, but Miller didn't accelerate. He engaged his turn signal and pulled the cruiser up to the curb, right in front of the park entrance. Isaiah saw the move. He didn't react physically, he didn't stiffen or flinch, but his internal threat condition moved from green to yellow. He took another sip of coffee, his eyes tracking the officer as the heavy car door swung open. Miller adjusted his utility belt, hitching up his pants. He put on his sunglasses, despite the fact that the park was shaded by large oak trees. It was a power move. He wanted to be a faceless authority. He began the long walk toward the bench. Isaiah sighed internally. Here we go, he thought. Just be polite. De-escalate. Don't let the demon out. Sergeant Miller stopped about 5 feet from the bench. He stood with his feet wide apart, thumbs hooked near his belt buckle, close to his holstered sidearm. It was an aggressive stance, designed to intimidate. Isaiah didn't look up immediately. He slowly lowered his coffee cup to his knee, keeping his movements deliberate. Then he raised his head, offering a polite, albeit tired nod. "Morning, officer," Isaiah said. His voice was a deep baritone, calm and steady like a calm ocean. Miller didn't return the greeting. He chewed on a piece of gum with an open mouth, staring down through his aviators. "You live around here?" Miller asked. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "I'm visiting," Isaiah said simply. "Visiting who?" "A friend." Miller scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "A friend. Right. Does this friend have a name or an address?" Isaiah looked the officer in the eye. "He does. But I'm not sure why that's relevant, officer. I'm just drinking my coffee." Miller took a step closer. The invasion of personal space was a calculated tactic. "It's relevant because I know everyone in this town, and I don't know you. We've had a lot of break-ins lately, shady characters hanging around parks, casing houses." "I'm not casing houses," Isaiah said, his voice remaining level. "I'm waiting for my meeting." "In a hoodie," Miller sneered. "In the middle of a workday. You got a job, pal." Isaiah smiled faintly. It was the smile of a man who knew he could dismantle the person in front of him in 3 seconds flat, but chose not to. "I have a job. I'm on leave." "Let me see some ID," Miller demanded, extending a hand. Isaiah paused. He knew the law. He knew his rights. Oak Haven was not a stop-and-identify jurisdiction unless there was reasonable suspicion of a crime. Sitting on a bench drinking coffee was not a crime. "Officer," Isaiah said, "am I being detained? Have I committed a crime?" Miller's face flushed a deep crimson. The veins in his thick neck bulged. He wasn't used to no. He was used to fear. He was used to submission. "I asked you for ID," Miller barked, his voice rising, causing a young mother nearby to gather her children and hurry away. "Now hand it over, or we're going to have a problem." "I don't have a problem, officer," Isaiah said, setting his coffee cup down on the bench next to him. "I'm asking for the articulate reason for your stop. If I'm not being detained, I'd prefer to finish my coffee in peace." Miller took off his sunglasses. His eyes were small, beady, and full of hate. "You want to play lawyer? Okay, we can play. Stand up." "I'm comfortable here." "I said stand up," Miller shouted, his hand dropping to rest on the grip of his taser. The shouting attracted attention. Oak Haven was a quiet town. Raised voices were a novelty. Across the street, a man walking a golden retriever stopped to watch. 2 teenagers on skateboards paused, sensing the tension, and instinctively pulled out their smartphones. Miller saw the phones. Usually, this would make a cop cautious. For Miller, it just fueled his ego. He wanted an audience. He wanted to show these rich suburbanites that he was the sheepdog protecting them from the wolf, even if the wolf was just a man having a morning coffee. "I'm going to ask you one last time," Miller hissed, leaning in so close Isaiah could smell the stale tobacco and peppermint on his breath. "ID now, or I put you in cuffs for failure to comply and resisting an officer." Isaiah assessed the tactical situation. Miller was unhinged. If Isaiah reached for his wallet, Miller might claim he was reaching for a weapon. If he didn't, Miller would get physical. "Officer," Isaiah said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "You are making a mistake. I suggest you take a step back and reassess the situation. My ID is in my back pocket. I am happy to show it to you if you can articulate a crime. But I am telling you now, if you put your hands on me, you will regret it. Not physically, I won't hurt you, but professionally. You are about to end your career." Miller laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. "My career? You think you can touch me? I am the law here, boy." Miller lunged. He didn't go for the handcuffs, he went for a dominance display. He grabbed the front of Isaiah's hoodie, intending to yank him off the bench. It was like trying to uproot an oak tree. Isaiah didn't budge, his core engaged, rooting him to the steel bench. Miller tugged, stumbled, and lost his balance for a split second. Isaiah's hand moved with lightning speed, not to strike, but to control. He clamped his hand over Miller's wrist, the one clutching his hoodie. "Let go," Isaiah commanded. It wasn't a request. Miller panicked. The strength in Isaiah's grip was terrifying. It felt like a hydraulic press. Miller realized instantly that he wasn't dealing with a vagrant, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat. "Get your hands off a police officer!" Miller screamed. He used his free hand to rip his taser from its holster. Taser! Taser! The crackle of the electricity sparked in the air. The crowd gasped. The teenagers were filming live now. Isaiah released Miller's wrist and raised his hands slowly, palms open. He knew that if he fought back now, he'd be shot. He had to endure the indignity to win the war. I am complying, Isaiah said clearly for the cameras. I am unarmed. I am complying. Miller, breathing heavily, aimed the taser at Isaiah's chest. Get on the ground. Face down. Hands behind your back. Do it now. Isaiah slowly moved off the bench. He went to his knees, then to his stomach. The pavement was cold. He crossed his ankles and placed his hands behind his back, interlocked. It was standard POW posture. Miller jammed a knee into Isaiah's back, harder than necessary, driving the air from his lungs. He slapped the cuffs on, ratcheting them tight enough to cut off circulation. Got you now, Miller whispered in Isaiah's ear. Resisting arrest. Assault on an officer. Disorderly conduct. You're going away for a long time. Miller hauled Isaiah to his feet. Isaiah stood tall, his face a mask of stone. He didn't look defeated. He looked like a king in chains. Check my back pocket, Isaiah said calmly. My wallet is there. My military ID is inside. Military ID? Miller laughed. What, you in the ROTC? Stolen valor? Miller reached into Isaiah's back pocket and fished out the leather wallet. He flipped it open. He froze. He wasn't looking at a standard driver's license. He was looking at a CAC card, a common access card. But it wasn't just any CAC. Alongside it was a folded, laminated card that usually accompanied high-level clearance, and tucked behind the plastic was a picture of Isaiah shaking hands with the President of the United States, wearing a dress uniform heavy with medals. Miller stared at the ID lieutenant commander. U.S. Navy. So you're a sailor, Miller sneered, trying to recover his bravado. Doesn't give you the right to disobey a lawful order. Look at the other card, Sergeant, Isaiah said. Miller squinted. He pulled out the second card. It was a card listing emergency contacts. The first name on the list wasn't a wife or a mother. It read, Nathan Thomas, Admiral, retired, USN, followed by a direct line to the Pentagon's JAG office. Miller's stomach did a slow, sickening flip, but he was too deep in. The crowd was watching. He couldn't just uncuff him and say, sorry. He had to double down. He had to make the charges stick to justify the force. I don't care who you know, Miller said, shoving the wallet into his own pocket. You're going to the station. Suddenly, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows screeched to a halt behind Miller's cruiser. The door flew open. A man in his 60s with silver hair and a posture that looked like it was forged from steel stepped out. He was wearing a casual polo, but he carried himself with an air of absolute command. It was Admiral Thomas Nathan. What? The Admiral roared, his voice booming across the park. In God's name do you think you are doing to my commander? Sergeant Miller turned to face the older man. He didn't recognize Admiral Nathan. To Miller, this was just another entitled senior citizen, interfering with police business. Step back, sir, Miller warned, his hand drifting toward his baton. This is an active crime scene. Interfere, and you'll join him in the back of the car. Admiral Thomas Nathan didn't flinch. He walked right up to Miller, invading the officer's personal space with the confidence of a man who had stared down Soviet destroyers during the Cold War. I am Admiral Thomas Nathan, United States Navy, retired, he announced, his voice cutting through the humid air like a knife. And the man you have in handcuffs is Lieutenant Commander Isaiah Washington, a decorated Navy SEAL. You have exactly 10 seconds to take those cuffs off, apologize, and pray he doesn't sue this department into the Stone Age. Miller blinked. The words registered, but his ego refused to accept them. A SEAL? This guy? But he had already committed. He had the cuffs on. The crowd was filming. If he backed down now, he looked weak. In Miller's twisted worldview, weakness was worse than being wrong. "I don't care if he's Captain America," Miller spat, shoving Isaiah toward the cruiser. He assaulted a police officer. He resisted arrest. He refused to identify himself. He's going to jail. "Assault?" Nathan asked, his face reddening with controlled rage. "I was watching from my car, Sergeant. He didn't touch you. You touched him. You escalated a consensual encounter into a civil rights violation because you didn't like the way he looked." "Tell it to the judge," Miller said, opening the back door of the cruiser. He grabbed Isaiah's head, roughly, dramatically, and shoved him into the cramped plastic seat of the cage. Isaiah didn't struggle. He locked eyes with Nathan through the window. "Make the call," his eyes said. Nathan nodded once, a micro gesture of understanding. He pulled out his phone as Miller slammed the car door shut. "You're making a mistake, son," Nathan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "A career-ending mistake." Miller laughed, walking around to the driver's side. "My union rep will have this cleared up by lunch. Go home, Grandpa." Miller peeled away from the curb, sirens blaring unnecessarily for a 3-block drive to the station. He wanted the spectacle. He wanted the town to see him cleaning up the streets. Inside the cruiser, the air conditioning was blasting, but Isaiah sat in silence. Miller glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see fear or anger. Instead, he saw Isaiah leaning his head back against the cage, eyes closed, looking bored. "Not so tough now, are you?" Miller taunted. "The military might let you get away with murder overseas, but here, in Oak Haven, I am the general." Isaiah opened one eye. "You have the right to remain silent, Sergeant. I suggest you use it. Everything you say is being recorded by your own dashcam." Miller slammed his hand on the dashboard, turning off the interior camera. "Whoops," he smirked. "Technical malfunction." "That," Isaiah said calmly, "is a felony. Tampering with evidence." "It's my word against yours," Miller said, pulling into the police station's Sally Port. "And I've got the badge." But as the garage door rolled down behind them, plunging them into the artificial light of the precinct, Miller had no idea that the war had already started. While he was driving, Admiral Nathan had made a phone call. He didn't call the local police chief. He didn't call the mayor. He called the Pentagon. The Oak Haven police station was a sterile building of cinder block and linoleum. Miller marched Isaiah through the back entrance, parading him past the booking desk. "What do we have here, Rick?" asked Officer Grimes, a younger cop sitting at the desk. "Got a big fish," Miller bragged, tossing Isaiah's wallet onto the counter. "Claims he's a Navy SEAL, resisted arrest, tried to break my wrist." Grimes picked up the wallet and looked at the ID. His eyes went wide. He looked at Isaiah, then back at the ID, then at Miller. "Rick," Grimes said, his voice hesitant. "This is a DOD Common Access card. Officer, Lieutenant Commander. Rick, this guy is an 04. That's a commissioned officer, a high-ranking one." "He's a suspect," Miller snapped. "Book him, fingerprints, mugshot, the works. Put him in the system so it ruins his clearance." Isaiah stood silently as they patted him down. They took his shoelaces. They took his belt. It was a ritual designed to strip a man of his dignity. But Isaiah had endured SERE school: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. He had been waterboarded during training. He had been hunted in the mountains of Kandahar. Standing in a brightly lit room with a chubby, power-tripping cop was a vacation compared to a Tuesday in Afghanistan. "Turn to the left," Miller barked, holding the camera for the mugshot. Isaiah turned. Flash. "Turn to the right." Isaiah turned. Flash. "Now sit." Miller shoved Isaiah into a metal chair in the holding cell. He didn't uncuff him. He left him there, handcuffed behind his back, for 45 minutes. Miller sat just outside the cell, doing paperwork, whistling loudly. He was writing up the report, creatively editing the facts. Suspect assumed an aggressive stance. Suspect verbalized threats. Officer feared for his life. He was just finishing the paragraph about Isaiah lunging at him when the heavy steel door at the front of the precinct slammed open. It hit the wall with a deafening bang. The noise was so loud Miller dropped his pen. He spun around, expecting a drunk or a riot. Instead, he saw Chief of Police Harrison. Chief Harrison was a good man, usually calm, usually smiling. Right now, he looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. His face was pale, sweating profusely, his tie loosened as if he couldn't breathe. And he wasn't alone. Behind him walked Admiral Nathan. And behind Nathan were two men in dark suits wearing earpieces, federal agents. And behind them was a woman in a sharp blazer carrying a briefcase. "Miller!" Chief Harrison screamed. It wasn't a call, it was a shriek of panic. "Get out here now!" Miller stood up, confused. "Chief? I just processed it." "Shut up!" Harrison roared, storming into the booking area. He looked at the holding cell. He saw Isaiah Washington, still handcuffed, sitting calmly. Harrison looked like he was about to have a stroke. He rushed to the cell door, fumbling with his keys. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped them twice before managing to unlock the door. "What are you doing, Chief?" Miller asked, stepping forward. "That guy is dangerous. He assaulted me." Harrison ignored him. He threw the cell door open and rushed to Isaiah. "Commander Washington," Harrison said, his voice trembling. "I am so sorry. Please, allow me." The Chief of Police personally unlocked the handcuffs. Isaiah rubbed his wrists, his expression unreadable. He stood up and looked at Miller. "Chief, what is going on?" Miller demanded, his face turning red. "You're letting a perp walk. I have charges. I have a report." "You don't have a report, Sergeant," said the woman with the briefcase, stepping forward. "You have a resignation letter." Miller scoffed. "Who are you?" "I am Eleanor Vance, from the District Attorney's Office," she said coldly. "And these gentlemen are from the FBI Civil Rights Division." Miller's knees felt weak. FBI, for a loitering stop. Admiral Nathan stepped forward, tapping his cane on the linoleum floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "You didn't just stop a loiterer, Sergeant Miller," Nathan said, his voice low and dangerous. "You illegally detained a naval special warfare officer on active duty. You falsified a police report. We have the witnesses and the live stream your dashboard camera missed. And you deprived a United States serviceman of his civil rights under color of law." I didn't know who he was," Miller stammered. "He didn't show ID. He tried." Isaiah spoke for the first time since entering the station. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of an executioner's axe. "You told me you didn't care. You told me you were the law." Isaiah walked out of the cell, rubbing his wrists. He stopped inches from Miller. "You wanted to teach me a lesson about power, Rick," Isaiah said. "Consider school in session." Chief Harrison turned to Miller. "Badge, gun, now." "Chief, come on, we go back 20 years, Miller pleaded, sweat pouring down his face. "It's just one mistake. Give me a suspension. Don't do this." "I don't have a choice, Rick," Harrison yelled, pointing at the phone on the wall. "Do you know who just called me? The governor. Do you know who called him? The Secretary of the Navy. You have brought a Category 5 hurricane down on this department. Give me the badge." Miller's hands shook as he unclipped his holster. He placed his Glock on the counter. Then, with trembling fingers, he unpinned the silver shield from his chest. "You're suspended without pay pending an internal and federal investigation," Harrison said. "Get out of my station." I need a ride home," Miller whispered. "Walk," Isaiah said. Miller looked up. "You made me walk," Isaiah said, pointing to the door. "Walk." Miller looked around the room. The other officers, men he had worked with for decades, wouldn't meet his eyes. They were looking at their shoes, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout. Defeated, Miller turned and walked toward the exit. He pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the sunlight. But if he thought the worst was over, he was wrong. Because outside the station, the internet had arrived. When Rick Miller pushed open the heavy steel doors of the Oak Haven police station, he was operating on muscle memory and denial. In his mind, this was a misunderstanding. He was a 20-year veteran. He was the sheepdog. He expected to walk to his truck, drive home, drink a cold beer, and wait for the union rep to call him and tell him it was all going to go away. He didn't just walk outside. He walked into an execution. The sidewalk, usually empty save for a few pigeons, was a sea of flashing lights and satellite trucks. It looked like the Super Bowl had descended on the quiet suburb. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and a dozen local affiliates had set up camp. As the doors swung shut behind him, the sound hit him like a physical blow. A cacophony of shutter clicks and shouted questions. "Officer Miller! Officer Miller! Is it true you used a racial slur? Did you know he was a Navy SEAL? Why did you turn off your body camera?" Miller recoiled, shielding his eyes against the strobe light effect of the camera flashes. He looked for a friendly face, a fellow officer, a bailiff, anyone. But the officers, standing guard at the perimeter, were looking straight ahead, their jaws set. They weren't protecting him. They were containing the chaos he had caused. They wouldn't even look him in the eye. He put his head down and aimed for his truck. A reporter from a national network, a woman he recognized from the nightly news, shoved a microphone over the police tape, nearly hitting him in the face. "Mr. Miller, the governor has called your actions a stain on the badge. Do you have a comment for the millions of people watching this right now?" "No comment," Miller croaked. His voice sounded thin, weak. "Get out of my way." He reached his truck, his beloved Ford F-25, the symbol of his masculinity. It was parked in the employee lot, but the lot was fenced with chain link, offering no privacy. He froze. Someone had gotten to it. The driver's side door had been keyed. Deep, jagged scratches that cut through the clear coat and paint, down to the primer. Scrawled into the metal in crude letters was a single word: tyrant. On the windshield, someone had slapped a sticker: stolen valor detector. Miller's hands shook so violently he dropped his keys in the gravel. The cameras caught it. The crowd laughed, a cruel, jeering sound. He scrambled to pick them up, fumbling with the lock, throwing himself into the cab like a frightened animal scuttling into a hole. He locked the doors. He started the engine. He peeled out of the lot, his tires squealing, nearly clipping a cameraman in his haste. The digital tsunami. The drive home was a blur of paranoia. Every car behind him felt like it was following him. Every pedestrian on their phone felt like they were filming him. He stopped at a red light and made the mistake of pulling out his phone. He opened Twitter. It was a bloodbath. The hashtag Oak Haven Tyrant wasn't just trending. It was the #1 topic in the world, above the president, above the Super Bowl. The video was everywhere. The full 4-minute clip of him escalating the situation, sneering at Isaiah, twisting the arm of a compliant man. But it was the commentary that destroyed him. Look at this guy. Classic, peaked in high school energy. He messed with the wrong one. That calmness from the SEAL. That's what a real warrior looks like. Miller looks like a terrified bully. I went to high school with Rick Miller. He used to steal lunch money. Glad to see he hasn't changed. Then, the doxing began. In the replies to a popular tweet, someone had posted a Google Maps screenshot. Here is his address: 42 Maplewood Drive. Go say hi. Miller threw the phone onto the passenger seat as if it were burning hot. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. They knew where he lived. The empty fortress. He turned onto Maplewood Drive. Usually, this was his sanctuary. A manicured lawn, a two-story colonial, an American flag waving on the porch. Now, there were news vans parked on his grass. He didn't pull into the driveway. He drove over the curb, through his own flower bed, and into the garage, hitting the remote closer, before the door had even cleared the roof of his truck. The garage door slammed shut, plunging him into darkness. He sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, waiting for his breathing to slow. It didn't. "Sheila!" he called out, opening the door into the kitchen. "Sheila, I'm home! It's a mess out there! You won't believe—" The house was silent. Not the silence of a quiet afternoon, but the heavy, dead silence of abandonment. "Sheila? Girls?" He walked into the kitchen. The refrigerator was bereft of the usual drawings his daughters made. The counter was cleared of the mail pile. On the island, there was a single sheet of paper. Next to it was his wedding ring. Miller picked up the ring first. It felt light. Then he read the note. "Rick, my sister saw the video. Then my mother saw it. Then the girls saw it on TikTok." Jenny came home crying because the kids at school showed her the video of her father kneeling on a black man's neck. They called her a racist. "She is 12, Rick. She is 12, and she is ashamed of her last name. I cannot do this. I cannot defend this. I took the girls to my mother's in Ohio. Do not come. Do not call. You loved that badge more than you ever loved us. Now you can have it." Sheila Miller crumpled the note in his fist. He sank to the floor, his back against the dishwasher. He wanted to scream, to break something, to blame Isaiah Washington for ruining his life. But deep down, in the pit of his stomach, he knew. Isaiah hadn't done this. Sheila hadn't done this. He had done this. The Union betrayal. The next morning, the final pillar of his life collapsed. Miller had spent the night sitting in the dark, watching the headlights of news vans sweep across his living room curtains. At 8 a.m., his phone rang. It was Big Mike Henderson, the union representative for the Oak Haven Police Benevolent Association. Mike was the guy who made DUIs disappear. Mike was the guy who fixed excessive force complaints. Mike was the fixer. "Mike," Miller said, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "Thank God. Listen, you got to get these reporters off my lawn and tell the chief I need—" "Rick," Mike interrupted. His voice was cold, businesslike. "Stop." "What do you mean, stop?" "I'm calling to inform you that the union board voted late last night. We are withdrawing your legal counsel representation, effective immediately." Miller blinked, confused. You can't do that. I pay my dues. You have to defend me." "We defend officers who act within the scope of their duties," Mike said. "We viewed the body cam footage, Rick, the footage you tried to delete. The audio log, that wasn't police work. That was a personal vendetta. You went rogue. It was a stressful stop. I feared for my safety." "He was drinking coffee, Rick," Mike snapped, losing his composure for a second. "He was a lieutenant commander in the SEALs, and you treated him like a stray dog. You made us all look like garbage. The National FOP, Fraternal Order of Police, has disavowed you. We aren't spending a dime of the pension fund to keep your ass out of prison." "Mike, please, they're going to charge me. I need a lawyer." "Then you better sell that truck," Mike said, "because you're going to need a private attorney. And Rick, don't come to the lodge anymore. You aren't welcome." The line went dead. The Hammer Drops Miller spent the next 3 days in a haze of alcohol and terror. He drank the cheap whiskey he kept in the cabinet. He watched the news, masochistically soaking in his own destruction. He saw Isaiah Washington giving a press conference. Isaiah looked regal, standing next to Arthur P. Halloway, the most feared civil rights attorney in the state. "We aren't just seeking damages," Halloway was saying to the cameras. "We are seeking justice. We are coming for the pension. We are coming for the assets. And we are coming for Mr. Miller's liberty." On the 4th day, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a reporter. It wasn't a pizza delivery prank. Miller looked through the peephole. He saw two men in dark suits. They wore earpieces. They didn't look like local cops. They looked like accountants who carried guns. FBI. Miller opened the door. He was wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. He hadn't shaved in 4 days. He smelled of bourbon and fear. Richard Miller, the lead agent asked. He held up a badge. I'm Special Agent Vance, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Yeah, Miller whispered. We have a warrant for your arrest, Vance said, his voice devoid of emotion. Please step out onto the porch and turn around. What? What are the charges? Deprivation of rights under color of law, witness tampering, perjury, and federal false statement charges. Miller stepped out. The morning sun was blinding. As Agent Vance slapped the handcuffs on, standard steel cuffs, not the zip ties they used for mass arrests, Miller looked across the street. His neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, was watering his lawn. Henderson used to wave to Miller every morning. He used to say, "Keep us safe out there, Rick." Henderson saw Miller in cuffs. He saw the FBI agents. Henderson didn't wave. He just shook his head, turned his back, and continued watering his petunias. Miller was shoved into the back of the unmarked sedan. As the car pulled away, leaving his foreclosed life behind, he realized the terrifying truth. The badge was gone. The gun was gone. The fear he used to inspire was gone. Now, he was just a criminal. And he was heading into a system he had spent 20 years filling with people who hated him. The federal courthouse in the district capital looked less like a building of law and more like a tomb. For Rick Miller, that is exactly what it was. 3 months had passed since the incident in Liberty Park. In that time, Miller's life had dissolved with terrifying speed. He had been suspended without pay, but he had clung to the hope that the blue wall of silence, the unspoken code among officers to protect their own, would save him. He expected the union to bully the DA. He expected the evidence to get lost. But when the FBI gets involved, the blue wall turns into a chain-link fence. Miller arrived at the courthouse in a cheap, ill-fitting suit he had bought at a discount store. His custom-tailored uniforms were seized as evidence. His wife Sheila wasn't there holding his hand. She had filed for divorce 2 weeks prior, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting full custody of their 2 daughters. She didn't want the girls associated with the name that was now a national synonym for bigotry. As Miller walked up the granite steps, he had to push through a gauntlet of reporters. There were no friendly faces, no supporters holding back the blue signs. Even the police stationed at the perimeter turned their backs on him as he passed. He was a pariah. Inside, courtroom 4B was packed to capacity. The air conditioning was humming, but the room felt suffocatingly hot. Miller took his seat at the defense table next to a court-appointed public defender named Greg Sauer. Sauer looked tired and disinterested. He knew this was a losing battle. Across the aisle, the prosecution table looked like a war room. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena Rostova, was arranging her files with surgical precision. Beside her sat Arthur P. Halloway, the shark of a civil rights attorney representing Isaiah in the parallel civil suit. But what made Miller's blood run cold was the gallery. In the front row sat Admiral Thomas Nathan, upright and unmoving as a statue. Next to him was Isaiah Washington. Isaiah wore a tailored navy suit that fit his muscular frame perfectly. He didn't look angry. He looked serene. Behind them were 6 men. They were diverse in appearance, beards, long hair, different races, but they all shared the same dangerous stillness. They sat with their arms crossed, staring directly at Miller. It was Isaiah's SEAL platoon. They had flown in on their own dime to watch the operator who tried to humiliate their brother get dismantled. The smoking gun. The trial moved with brutal efficiency. The prosecution didn't need theatrics. They had facts. They called the neighbors who saw the stop. They called the teenagers who filmed the arrest. But the nail in the coffin came on the third day, when the prosecution called Dr. Aris Thorne, a digital forensics expert from the FBI. "Dr. Thorne," the prosecutor began, pacing before the jury. "Mr. Miller claims that his body camera malfunctioned at the exact moment the physical altercation began. Is that consistent with your findings?" "No," Thorne said, adjusting his glasses. "The log files indicate a manual shutdown." Mr. Miller pressed the power button for 3 seconds. "So, the camera was off." "The video feed was terminated," Thorne corrected. "However, the model of body camera used by the Oak Haven PD has a fail-safe feature known as pre-event buffering and post-event audio lag. Essentially, it captures 30 seconds of video before activation and keeps the microphone hot for 2 minutes after improper shutdown to prevent evidence tampering." Miller froze. He felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at his lawyer, Sauer, who just shrugged. "You didn't tell me that," Sauer's eyes seemed to say. "And did you recover audio from that hot mic period?" "We did." "Please play Exhibit G for the jury." The courtroom went silent. Then, the speakers crackled with the sound of Miller's heavy breathing and the slam of a car door. "Not so tough now, are you?" Miller's voice rang out, dripping with arrogance. "The military might let you get away with murder overseas, but here, in Oak Haven, I am the general." The jury shifted uncomfortably. Miller stared at the table, refusing to look up. Then came the rustling of fabric and a whisper that sealed his fate. "Whoops! Technical malfunction. No video, no case." A collective gasp swept through the room. One juror, an older woman in the back row, shook her head in visible disgust. Miller had confessed to tampering with evidence on his own recording device. The cross-examination. When Miller took the stand in his own defense, it was a desperate Hail Mary. He tried to cry. He tried to talk about the stress of the job, the fear of the unknown. "I just wanted to make sure the neighborhood was safe," Miller sobbed, wiping his nose. He was a big guy. He looked threatening. Arthur Halloway stood up for the cross-examination. He didn't shout. He walked over to the witness stand and rested his hand on the railing, looking at Miller like a specimen in a jar. "Mr. Miller," Halloway said smoothly, "you said Commander Washington looked threatening. You described him as agitated in your initial report. Is that correct?" "Yes," Miller sniffed. "And yet," Halloway pointed to the large screen where the teenager's cell phone footage was paused. "In this video, Commander Washington is sitting down. His legs are crossed. He is holding a cup of coffee. At what point does a seated man drinking a latte constitute a lethal threat?" He had a look in his eye," Miller stammered. "A defiance." "Defiance?" Halloway pounced. "Is defiance a crime, Mr. Miller? Is hurting your feelings a felony in the state of Virginia?" "No, but he refused to identify himself." "Which is his legal right," Halloway snapped. "You know the law, don't you? Or were you absent the day they taught the Fourth Amendment at the Academy?" Miller's face turned red. The anger, the same anger that caused this mess, started to bubble up. "I am the law on that street," Miller shouted, slamming his hand on the witness stand. "When I say jump, he should jump. I don't care if he's a SEAL or the Pope." Halloway smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who just watched the prey walk into the trap. "No further questions, Your Honor. The verdict." The jury deliberated for less than 90 minutes. When they returned, they didn't look at Miller. "We, the jury," the foreman announced, his voice steady, "find the defendant, Richard Miller, guilty on all counts. Guilty of deprivation of rights under color of law. Guilty of falsifying police records. Guilty of assault. Guilty of perjury." Judge Sarah Klein, a woman known for her icy demeanor, peered over her reading glasses at Miller. "Richard Miller, please stand." Miller stood. His legs felt like jelly. He gripped the table to keep from collapsing. "You have disgraced your uniform. Judge Klein said, her voice echoing in the silence. You took a position of public trust and weaponized it to stroke your own ego. You targeted a man who has done more for this country in a single day than you have done in your entire life. And when you were caught, you lied. And for the federal charges, I sentence you to 120 months, 10 years, in a federal correctional institution. There will be no possibility of parole. Miller let out a strangled sob. 10 years. Furthermore, the judge continued, shifting her papers, in the matter of the civil suit, Washington versus Miller, due to the finding of malicious intent, the court rules that qualified immunity does not apply. You are personally liable. The court awards the plaintiff $4. $5 million in punitive damages. The court orders the immediate seizure of all personal assets to satisfy this judgment. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. The fallout. The karma that hit Rick Miller wasn't just a legal slap on the wrist. It was a total dismantling of his existence. 2 days after the sentencing, the U.S. Marshals arrived at Miller's home. He wasn't there. He was already in a holding cell. But his estranged wife was there to collect the last of her things. She watched from the driveway as the marshals placed seizure tags on everything. They took the boat he had bought on credit. They took the collection of antique firearms he was so proud of. Then they came for the truck. It was a Ford F250, lifted, with custom rims and a thin blue line decal on the back window. It was Miller's pride and joy. It was his identity. A tow truck backed into the driveway, hooked it up, and dragged it away to be sold at a police auction. The money would go directly to Isaiah Washington's charity. The house was foreclosed upon immediately. The bank accounts were frozen and drained. But the worst part came when Miller was transferred to the FCI Petersburg Low Security Prison. He was processed in like any other inmate. He was stripped naked, sprayed for lice, and given a beige jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too small. He was given a number. He was no longer Sergeant Miller. He was inmate 49201-083. As he was walked to his cell block, the reality of his situation set in. He was a former cop in a federal prison. He would have to be placed in protective custody, solitary confinement for his own safety. He would spend 23 hours a day in a concrete box the size of a parking space. There would be no audience for him here. No one to bully. No one to intimidate. He was the smallest man in the building. The final lesson. A week later, Isaiah Washington stood in the center of the newly renamed Nathan Washington Youth Center in downtown Oak Haven. The building, formerly a dilapidated warehouse, was now gleaming with fresh paint. It had a boxing gym, a computer lab, and a library. The $4.5 million judgment had paid for all of it. Isaiah stood by the entrance, watching kids stream in. Kids who looked like him. Kids who used to be afraid to walk through the park. Admiral Nathan walked up beside him, leaning on his cane. "You could have kept the money, you know," Nathan said quietly. "Bought a nice house in the Caribbean." Isaiah shook his head. "Blood money, Admiral. I don't want it. Miller wanted to take something from this community. I made sure he gave back instead." "He's in solitary," Nathan noted, "writing letters to the governor, begging for a pardon." "He won't get it," Isaiah said, his voice flat. "He's right where he belongs." Isaiah looked out the glass doors. He saw a police cruiser roll by. The officer inside was a new hire, a woman. She slowed down as she passed the center, smiled, and gave a respectful wave to the kids playing out front. Isaiah waved back. The war was over. The predator had been removed from the ecosystem, and the balance was restored. Isaiah turned his back on the street and walked into the gym, where a group of young men were waiting for their boxing lesson. He wasn't a victim. He wasn't a target. He was a commander, and he had work to do. And that is how the story ends. Rick Miller thought his badge gave him the right to judge, harass, and destroy. He thought Isaiah Washington was just another victim he could trample on. But he learned the hard way that when you judge a book by its cover, sometimes you open a chapter you can't close. Isaiah didn't just win a court case, he dismantled a bully's entire life without ever throwing a punch. It's a powerful reminder. True strength isn't about how loud you yell or how much force you use. True strength is composure, dignity, and the truth. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs to see a bully get what they deserve, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a new story. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe and stay strong.